Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us to our dry bean Getting the Right production meeting. My name is Greg Endress. I'll serve as one of the moderators for the program. The other moderator is Sam Markell. And I'm going to bring up my screen to go through a few slides as an introduction for our program. So again, welcome. Hans Kandel and I were the organizers of the program. Sam and I will be the moderators. And then we especially want to thank Linda Schuster, Administrative Secretary at the Carrington Research Extension Center, for her work in registration and especially for helping us provide this virtual delivery. And I certainly want to acknowledge NortHarvest Dry Bean Growers Association for their support in making this meeting happen. So to give you an overview of what we want to cover today, in the first hour and 15 minutes, we'll have 3 presentations, including a variety review and discussion, and then the information on plant establishment and plant nutrition. And then we'll take a break and then come back on at 10:30 to cover the balance of the presentations that include a NortHarvest report and then some updates on pest management with dry beans. In addition, we do have a pre-recorded video from Frayne Olson, our Extension Crops economist. It is posted now, and in the reminders that you received today or yesterday, there is a link where you can take a look at Frayne's presentation. So we'd encourage you to do that. Then also all of the presentations that are given today will be pre-recorded. They'll be edited a bit and then posted. I don't know exactly when, but I hope in a few days to a week that they'll be available and at the link that's shown. You also get an email with this information as well. But if you go to the Carrington Center homepage, look down the left-hand margin. At the bottom of the listing, there'll be one on videos. You click on that, and then you find Frayne's presentation now. And those that are being presented today, they'll be there in the future. So our sessions are either scheduled for 15 or 25 minutes, and the presentations are either 10 or 20 minutes. And then you will have the opportunity to ask questions as an audience by submitting a typed question in the chat box. And then primarily Sam Markell will be reciting to the speakers the questions that you submit. We will have limited time, as you probably surmise from looking over the agenda. We'll probably have time for just a couple, 3 questions, depending too on how long the speakers go. And then at the end, we will be displaying a QR code for those of you that are CCAs to get your continuing education units. There's 2.5 credits total available today. And then I'll be making 3 displays. One is after my presentation for crop management, one after Dave Franson's for nutrient management, and then one after the pest management group for another 1 pest management unit. And then I will display all 3 of the codes at the end of the presentation too, in case you miss them. And then we're giving you opportunities for evaluation, and we really value your comments and willingness to complete the evaluation. So we have 3 opportunities actually. For those of you that attended one of the 3 programs in 2020, the Dry Bean Getting It Right, we'd really appreciate you completing that survey. And the link is on the invitation for this meeting. And then during each presentation, or at the end of them, we have 2 simple questions that we'll ask you. What was the value of the presentation, and then how might you use it? And then after today's program, you will receive an opportunity for an overall assessment of our program. So again, we really appreciate you taking the time to complete these. They're valuable for us in giving you a quality program, and also to help let others know, especially where we have funding, let others know the results of our program. So with that, I think we're about ready to begin. We'll ask Dr. Hans Kandel to join us. Hans is our extension agronomist with the NDSU extension, and they'll be discussing information on market types, as well as quite a focus on variety performance. So Hans, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk about basically about some of the varieties and some practical things regarding variety selection. So in North Dakota, we do have basically three major market types. On the bottom line, you see the black. The second line, the red, is the navy. And on the left, you see the acres. And on the bottom, the years. And if we look at the green line, that is the Pinto. So if you just kind of look at that, the market classes, black and navy, are less than the Pinto, which is the dominant. And if we look at the last, the top bar, that is the total acres. I put that in just to point out that in 2020, we basically had the most acres for a long time. That is the number of acres. So today I'm going to talk basically about the main types. And I'm first talking a little bit about the black bean and put it into context. So in this graph, on the bottom, the years. On the left, you will see the pounds per acre. This is data from the statistical service. And each dot is the reported yield for black bean. And you will see the same in the other classes. So if we look at the dots, you can see that they bounce up and down, and we'll explain a bit why that might be. And then we have a regression equation here. And if you look at the equation, that indicates that the slope of the line would suggest that we have been increasing black bean by 12 pounds per acre. Now, there are two factors involved in increases of yield. One is the genetics, and the other one is the management. So now the next one is on navy bean, same scenario, the year, each dot is the year's yield. And then we look at the regression equation for the navy bean. And for navy bean, the increase has been about 24 pounds per acre. So that is kind of the trend line for the navy bean. Now, every year, as a group, we're asking most of the dry bean growers to give us some feedback on management aspects. And one of the questions is, can you give us what percent of your acres were damaged by water? And in this graph, you'll see that in 2012, we had a very low percent of acres damaged by water, meaning it was a dry year. And we had some wet years here in the center, and I put a marker here for 2019, which was a wet year. The reason why I'm pointing that out, because I'm going to show you here on the trend line some of those points. So the dry year is indicated with the first arrow, and then the wet year is indicated with the second arrow. So that was 2019. So if you look here, this is for the Pinto bean. The trend line is going here. So we see that in the wet years, we had a couple of situations where many acres could not be harvested or had damage, and then we are below the trend line. So when we talk about classes, when we talk about varieties, we also have to also consider the environment. So based on the regression equation here, we can see that over the period that we investigate, there is about a 19 pounds increase per acre for the Pinto bean. Now, the other question that we ask in the survey is about some management. And I'm only going to focus on one thing here because it relates to classes. And the question is, what percent of the growers are using inoculant? And as you can see, on average, the growers use about 17% of the growers use inoculant. The reason why I wanted to point it out is that there is an interaction between the classes and the ability to nodulate. So here is early season nodules for three classes. The Eclipse is the black, the Lariat is the Pinto, and the Vista is the navy. And as you can see, the Pinto tends to be more prone to nodulation than the other classes. So we have a lot of resources, and there's not enough time to go into all the details of the growth stages, but we do have a very handy dry bean production guide that you can find on the web by Googling dry bean production guide. And on page 11 to 13 is a very good description of the various growth stages. So I'm going to focus a couple of the next slides on the variety, the booklet that we have. And the easiest is for you to Google NDSU variety trials. You will get to a website where you can select several things. So the dry bean has all the data for the experiment station, but on the right is a booklet, a PDF booklet that will give you all the results of 2020. And I'm going to summarize some of those in this presentation. So the booklet is also available at some of the research extension centers on the web. So the thing about variety selection is that we do have various locations throughout the state that conduct the dry bean trials. And we're always looking for trends across years for the different varieties. We do use a term called LSD, that is the term least significant difference, and that is on the bottom of all the trials. And if the difference between two varieties is bigger than the LSD, then we can be 95 or 90% sure, depending on the LSD value that is indicated on the bottom, that the varieties are truly different. You also will see a coefficient of variation. We hope that that one is low enough, because that means that there is the data is very reliable. So I'm going to give you a couple of things that you can find in the booklet. So we have a couple of tables where it talks about the cultivars, and I'm just using Pinto, but in the booklets we also have for black bean and for navy, and we give you some of the types. So on the RM type is the relative maturity. It is indicated if it is early or medium or late, and then the type. Now the type is very important because we really are moving towards direct harvesting, and we want to have varieties that are able to be harvested directly. So in a description of varieties, we also have determinate and indeterminate types of beans. In our region, we do not have determinate. So we are focusing on the indeterminate, and in the middle, you can see that we like to have either an upright short vine or an upright vine. So that is the classes that we really would like to select. Now, what is the difference in this kind of cartoon? Determined means the plant grows and all the blossoms take place and then it is done. Where in most cases we have the indeterminate bush type, and that is what we see in some of the navies and the blacks. It makes the blossoms, but it still keeps on growing. And then we have also a little bit of a bush, but it is a bit more floppy, like some of our Pinto beans. So the other thing that is kind of new that we have to look at is the slow darkening gene. There are a number of varieties out that have this gene that causes the Pinto bean not to get brown very rapidly. So there are a few items that have an effect on it. It can be the environment, but we are focusing today a bit on the varieties. So here I'm taking an example of the book, and there are a lot of numbers here, but I'm going to break it down for you. So this is some of the information on the irrigated trial. So in some of the next slide, I will look at maturity and yield, and I will look at direct harvest and yield. So what does it mean, those headings? So day after planting is the day AP, but now I'm going to focus on some of the numbers here, because that is critical in our selection. So growth habit was indicated by the researchers in Carrington. And basically it says that on the scale of 1 to 9, the higher number indicates that we have a more upright type. The next column is an estimate of the researchers, and it's kind of giving how much of the beans would be harvestable based on the architecture of the plant. So when it says 75, that means the researchers thought that if you harvest, you will at least get 75% of the beans. And I'm going to give a few graphs here. So one of the graphs is looking at maturity, and that is still from the Carrington data. The maturity on the bottom going from 90 to about 105, and the pounds per acre for the variety. So I'm not indicating which variety here, but I'm just looking at the total number of varieties and maturity. And what we see here is that in 2020, the earlier maturing varieties yielded higher than the late maturing varieties. Now, typically, for instance, with soybeans, it is the other way around, that the longer the plants are in the field, the higher yield we have. I'm not exactly sure why this is, but it is something that we need to kind of focus on. But the next slide is kind of looking at the harvestability. And these are the numbers from Carrington. On the bottom, you'll see the percent beans that the researcher thinks could be harvested. And then on the left, the yield that was actually harvested. And you see that the estimation of the researchers, kind of the trend line is, if they were estimating that more beans could be harvested, that the yields tended to be higher. In other words, getting varieties that are more upright and can be harvested and have a higher probability of getting more seeds in the hopper are the ones that we would like to focus on. This is courtesy of Greg Andrews. He compared the dryland variety trials for many, many years. So this is a compilation of 81 to 2008. And he was just looking at the dryland yield versus the irrigated yield. So the bars on the left is the dryland and the irrigated. So those two trials, the averages. And as you can see, for the Pinto, the navy, and the black, all of them are in that 32 to 35, 36% lower yielding in the dryland conditions for the irrigated. And that is kind of indicating that in many of our dryland conditions, we would have more yield potential if we have enough moisture. So now I'm going to kind of quickly focus on a few results from the trials over various environments. So this is looking at 2020 for the Pinto bean 9 environments. And on the bottom, you'll see the various Pinto beans in the trial. And on the bottom, you see which research stations had those in it. I just put also an arrow here. Those two were the slow darkening Pinto beans. The A on top, and if there is an A in all the bars, that means that those were significantly similar. So I could not distinguish amongst them. So this data will be available for you to look at in more detail as it comes online. But I'm always looking at trends not over 1 year, but over various years. So this is combining over 2 years. So on the left of each variety, we see 219, 220, and then the average. And I just put the significance only on the average. So you can see that there is a group here of varieties that statistically are similar, but there is variety difference in yield. So selecting varieties is important. But as we were talking about 2020, actually the rainfall was quite a bit lower in certain locations in the state. So in Carrington, the season-long average or the season-long rainfall was about that red bar below what we would anticipate in a normal year. So what effect does that have? So here I'm just give an example of dry bean. So this is Carrington, which was the dry land, and this is the Carrington irrigated. So again, here you can see that is the difference due to the lack of moisture that we see. So here in this graph, I'm comparing three black beans that were across all the variety trials: Blacktails, Eclipse, and a new variety that is just released, ND Twilight. So that is the newer one, and it has some benefits that it is a little bit earlier than Eclipse. It is upright, and it has resistance to bean common mosaic virus and some rust. So there are some benefits of this variety. So now I'm looking at the navy class, and here we have Blizzard, Medalist, and T9905. And on the right, you see the average. There is no significant difference amongst those navy beans. So if I combine the navy beans over 2 years, you can see everywhere it says NS, meaning that I could not determine any significant differences amongst those navy bean types. So if we're looking at the variety results, of course, we have already established that drought, like for instance, Carrington dry versus irrigated, makes a difference in the results. Excess water, I tried to show you earlier that during the excess water years, we typically have lower yield. Of course, we will have an effect varieties with fertility levels, salinity, and the previous history and so forth. So I want to kind of point out just a few little things here. That's this is a soybean, but in the left we see here relative to pinto beans, and on the bottom you see the salinity. So pinto bean is very sensitive, so even with a little bit of salt you can already really drop your yield. So I talked about the wet conditions. We also have been asking how many growers have been managing excess water due to tile, and there's only about 8% of the growers that do. So I want to close today with this picture, just showing the effect of the management as well as the conditions. Here in the center, we see an area that was tiled, so excess water was removed, and we get a very nice bean yield. And we hardly get any yields of the headlands and the salty areas, and this area was not tile drained. So in summary, variety selection is very important, but also the management in order to obtain the yields that we want.